Before we speak of nations, policies, and power, let us pause to remember a truth older than any border, that every people, every land, is guided by a purpose greater than itself. History is not written by the strongest alone, but by those who stand firm in their convictions when the winds of challenge blow hardest. Today's story is not just about trade or tariffs, but about the spirit of sovereignty, the courage to choose one's own path, and the faith that justice walks beside those who walk with truth. Stay with me, the journey begins now. The dramatic escalation in trade tensions between the United States and India, sparked by a significant policy shift from Washington. In a move that reverberated across global markets, the U.S. administration announced an increase in tariffs on certain Indian goods to a staggering 50%. This was not a gradual adjustment, but a sharp, calculated strike that targeted one of America's major trading partners. The stated reason behind this aggressive tariff hike was India's continued import of discounted Russian crude oil, even as Washington sought to pressure Moscow through global isolation efforts. For the U.S., these imports represented a direct challenge to its foreign policy objectives, particularly its sanctions campaign against Russia. However, for India, the oil purchases were framed as a matter of national interest, ensuring energy security at a time of volatile prices and unstable global supply chains. This tariff move signaled a departure from the cooperative tone that had often characterized U.S.-India relations in recent years. The two nations had enjoyed a strategic partnership that spanned defense cooperation, technology sharing, and joint initiatives in the Indo-Pacific. Raising tariffs to such a high level was not only an economic blow, but also a symbolic gesture of public reprimand that risked undermining years of diplomatic rapport. For American exporters, the decision carried its own set of risks, as India is a major market for U.S. products ranging from agricultural goods to high-tech equipment. Similarly, for Indian exporters, the steep tariffs threatened to erode their competitiveness in one of their most lucrative markets. The fallout was not confined to economics. It touched on geopolitics, national pride, and the delicate balance of global alliances, injecting new strain into a relationship once hailed as a cornerstone of democratic cooperation. India's strong response to what it perceives as an uneven application of U.S. trade and foreign policy measures. While Washington imposed steep tariffs and diplomatic pressure on India for continuing to purchase Russian oil, New Delhi pointed out a glaring inconsistency. Other nations, including China and several U.S. allies, have also maintained substantial energy ties with Moscow, yet have faced no equivalent punitive measures from the United States. From India's perspective, this discrepancy highlights a double standard that goes beyond mere trade disagreements. It suggests a selective enforcement of economic pressure, one that undermines the argument that these policies are purely about upholding international principles. Indian officials underscored that their actions importing oil at discounted rates from Russia are driven by pragmatic concerns for energy security, inflation control, and the welfare of their population. They emphasized that these decisions are not acts of defiance but strategic necessities. The Indian government statements framed the issue as one of fairness and sovereign equality. If punitive measures are truly about discouraging Russian oil purchases, they argued, then consistency demands that all nations engaged in similar transactions be treated equally. Singling out India, they warned, risks sending a message that geopolitical friendships and rivalries determine policy enforcement more than any objective standard. By raising this point, India sought to reposition the narrative. Rather than appearing as a nation resisting international norms, it presented itself as the target of a biased approach, one that penalizes a key democratic partner while overlooking larger or strategically inconvenient players. This rhetorical shift was aimed not only at the United States, but also at the global community, inviting observers to question whether the application of such policies truly reflects a principled stand or a strategic calculation favoring certain relationships over others. focuses on India's firm stance in the face of mounting U.S. pressure, despite the imposition of steep tariffs and repeated calls from Washington to halt its imports of Russian oil. New Delhi has maintained a composed and resolute posture. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and other senior leaders have consistently emphasized that India's decisions in matters of trade and foreign policy are guided by its national interest, not by external demand. Rather than responding with heated rhetoric or escalating measures, Indian officials have chosen a tone of measured dignity. This approach communicates strength without appearing combative. By reinforcing the idea of sovereignty, they underline that energy procurement and economic strategy are sovereign rights, not privileges subject to approval from other nations. For India, the discounted oil imports from Russia are framed as an essential safeguard against inflationary pressures and energy shortages, particularly in a country with a massive and growing population. Diplomatic channels remain active, but India's messaging has been clear. Strategic autonomy will not be compromised. In various public statements and media interactions, Indian policymakers have reiterated that while they value the relationship with the United States, they will not accept terms that undermine their independent decision-making. This stance is rooted in India's long-standing foreign policy tradition of non-alignment and balancing multiple partnerships simultaneously. The domestic narrative has also been important. By projecting calm resolve internationally, the government sends a signal to its citizens that it will protect national interests even when confronted by one of the world's most powerful economies. This has reinforced public support for the leadership's choices, while also demonstrating to global partners that India will remain steady under external pressure, relying on its own strategic calculations rather than yielding to unilateral demands. The influence of lobbying on the evolving dynamics between the United States, India, and Pakistan. In Washington, policy decisions are often shaped not only by strategic calculations, but also by the activities of well-connected lobbyists who advocate for the interests of their clients. In this case, while India has historically maintained an active presence in U.S. political circles, recent developments suggest its lobbying power may have been overshadowed by more aggressive or better-positioned counterparts. Reports indicate that individuals and groups aligned with Pakistan have been particularly effective in communicating their narratives to American policymakers. This has occurred at a time when India's diplomatic messaging has been heavily focused on defending its oil trade policies and maintaining its position on Russia. As a result, some analysts argue that India's attention on one front may have left room for competing voices to gain traction in shaping perceptions within Washington. The situation is further complicated by the personal relationships and networks that lobbyists cultivate over time. Well-timed meetings, targeted briefings, and campaign contributions can create an environment in which certain perspectives are amplified, influencing how decision-makers interpret complex international issues. In the current scenario, this has contributed to a policy climate less favorable to India's immediate interests. For New Delhi, the shifting balance of lobbying influence raises questions about how effectively it can safeguard its strategic priorities in an environment where policy is not determined solely by state diplomacy. While traditional diplomacy operates in public and through formal channels, lobbying works behind the scenes, shaping the context in which official decisions are made. This behind-the-scenes contest of influence has become an increasingly important factor in understanding why U.S. actions toward India have taken their current course. India's renewed emphasis on economic self-reliance in light of escalating trade tensions with the United States, faced with steep U.S. tariffs and the possibility of reduced access to a major export market, New Delhi has highlighted its capacity to adapt by diversifying trade relationships and strengthening domestic production. This shift aligns with the government's ongoing Vocal for Local initiative, which promotes the consumption and production of goods made within India. The policy is designed not merely as a slogan, but as a framework for reducing dependency on volatile global supply chains. By encouraging local manufacturing and innovation, India aims to shield itself from the external shocks that can arise from sudden geopolitical disputes or economic sanctions. Officials have also underscored the importance of expanding trade ties with alternative partners in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, as well as deepening relationships with energy suppliers that are willing to offer favorable terms. In addition to market diversification, there is a focus on investing in infrastructure, digital industries, and clean energy to boost the resilience of the domestic economy. By cultivating a broader range of export destinations and strengthening internal production capabilities, India seeks to mitigate the risks associated with over-reliance on any single foreign market. This approach also has a political dimension. By framing the U.S. tariffs as an opportunity to accelerate self-reliance, the government is able to turn an adverse situation into a rallying point for national unity. Public discourse has shifted towards celebrating domestic ingenuity and resilience, with the underlying message that India's economic trajectory should be guided primarily by its own strategic priorities, regardless of external pressures. This narrative reinforces both economic independence and national confidence in the face of global challenges, the potential strain that current U.S.-India tensions could place on the Quad alliance. The Quad, composed of the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, has been positioned as a strategic grouping aimed at promoting stability and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, with an implicit focus on counterbalancing China's growing influence. In recent years, it has been a platform for joint military exercises, coordinated policy statements, and discussions on technology and supply chain security. However, the recent imposition of high U.S. tariffs on Indian goods has introduced a new element of friction into this arrangement. Trust and mutual respect are central to the functioning of any alliance, and India may now view Washington's actions as undermining that spirit. While trade disputes do not automatically dismantle strategic partnerships, they can create political hesitations that spill over into other areas of cooperation. The timing is particularly sensitive. Plans for upcoming Quad meetings, including potential high-level summits, depend on a unified front. A deterioration in bilateral relations between the United States and India could affect the willingness of leaders to engage with the same level of openness or ambition. Moreover, disagreements on trade policy may complicate the ability of the Quad to present itself as a cohesive unit when addressing broader regional challenges. For Australia and Japan, both of which value the Quad's stability, these tensions represent a potential obstacle to the group's effectiveness. They may find themselves in a delicate position, seeking to maintain solidarity while also encouraging a resolution to the dispute. If left unaddressed, the rift between Washington and New Delhi could erode the momentum the Quad has built in recent years, affecting not just diplomatic coordination, but also the symbolic message it sends to other nations in the Indo-Pacific region. India's continued commitment to a multipolar foreign policy approach despite increasing pressure from the United States. Multipolarity, in this context, refers to maintaining diversified strategic relationships rather than aligning exclusively with one power bloc. India has long pursued this path, balancing its ties with the U.S., Russia, China, and other regional partners to preserve flexibility and safeguard its national interests. In the current dispute, this principle has been clearly visible. Even as Washington has sought to curtail India's energy imports from Russia, New Delhi has reaffirmed its right to maintain those transactions, citing both economic necessity and strategic autonomy. At the same time, India has kept diplomatic channels open with China on trade and regional security issues, despite ongoing tensions along their shared border. This ability to engage multiple powers, even when they are in conflict with each other, is central to India's global strategy. India's approach also reflects an understanding that global power is no longer concentrated in a single superpower. By nurturing varied partnerships, India positions itself as an independent pole within the international system, capable of engaging with different blocs without being entirely dependent on any of them. This has allowed it to secure favorable trade deals, access to advanced technology, and cooperation in defense, while avoiding entanglement in disputes that do not serve its immediate interests. The current U.S.-India rift underscores the risks and rewards of such a strategy. On one hand, it enables India to resist unilateral demands from powerful partners. On the other, it sometimes creates friction with those same partners when their expectations are not met. Nonetheless, India's continued emphasis on multipolarity signals its intent to remain a sovereign decision maker in a world of shifting alliances and competing geopolitical priorities. The decline in U.S. standing within Indian public and policy circles as a result of Washington's recent hardline measures. The steep tariffs on Indian exports and the public demands to halt Russian oil purchases have been interpreted by many in New Delhi as acts of political coercion rather than fair policy decisions. This perception has been amplified by the belief that other countries engaging in similar practices have not faced equivalent consequences, creating an image of selective enforcement. In the Indian media and political discourse, the move has been portrayed as a setback in what had been described as a growing strategic partnership. Commentators have pointed out that for years, the U.S. presented itself as a reliable and respectful partner, committed to mutual benefit and shared democratic values. The recent actions, however, have raised doubts about whether those commitments hold when U.S. interests are perceived to be under pressure. Among policymakers, there is growing concern that Washington's approach could erode the goodwill that has been built over decades of cooperation. This erosion is not limited to government circles. Public opinion surveys and social media sentiment indicate a rise in skepticism toward U.S. intentions. Many Indians now question whether aligning too closely with Washington leaves them vulnerable to sudden shifts in policy or economic retaliation. This shift in perception has strategic implications. A weakening of trust at the popular level can influence the political space leaders have to negotiate and collaborate with foreign partners. Even when official diplomatic ties remain intact, the underlying sentiment among citizens and opinion leaders can shape the tone and scope of bilateral engagement. In this case, the hardline U.S. measures have introduced a strain that could take time and effort to reverse. The potential long-term geopolitical consequences of the U.S. attempt to isolate India over its continued trade with Russia. By targeting India with punitive tariffs and political pressure, Washington risks pushing New Delhi closer to alternative power centers, particularly Russia and China. Such a shift would not occur overnight, but even incremental changes in India's diplomatic posture could alter the balance of influence in Asia and beyond. India occupies a pivotal position in the global strategic landscape. As one of the fastest-growing major economies, a nuclear power, and a key player in regional security frameworks, its alignment can significantly impact the distribution of power. Should New Delhi deepen its engagement with Moscow, it could strengthen Russia's economic resilience against Western sanctions. If cooperation with Beijing expands, even in selective areas such as trade or infrastructure, it could complicate U.S. efforts to rally a unified front in the Indo-Pacific. These potential shifts would also affect multilateral organizations. India's stance could influence decision-making in forums such as BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and even climate negotiations, where its support is often critical for consensus. The perception that Washington is willing to jeopardize a major partnership over a single policy disagreement might also discourage other nations from fully aligning with U.S. positions, fearing similar treatment. In addition, there is the possibility that India's emphasis on multipolarity could become more pronounced, accelerating global trends away from a U.S.-centric order. As countries diversify their diplomatic and economic relationships, the influence of any single power diminishes. For the United States, losing ground with India would mean ceding part of its strategic reach in a region that is central to its long-term foreign policy objectives, potentially reshaping the geopolitical map for decades to come. The unfolding rift between the United States and India underscores a turning point in global diplomacy where strategic autonomy, economic resilience, and balanced alliances are no longer optional but essential for emerging powers. India's steadfastness in defending its national interests, even amid intense pressure, signals a broader shift toward a more multipolar world. The lessons here extend beyond trade disputes. They remind us that trust, fairness, and mutual respect are the true foundations of lasting partnerships. Good luck in delivering this speech with conviction, and thank you for entrusting me to help craft it with clarity and strength.